Hey, what's up everybody? Commander Radix here, bringing you another video, and this is an interesting setup where I have the power of the sun coming through the windows. It's way too bright for this camera to handle, but we'll just have to work with that. But the weirdness of my lighting for this episode isn't the only weird thing we're going to be talking about today. No, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to be talking about some weird time stuff. Have you ever thought deeply about time and the nature of time? Isn't it crazy how it moves in one direction but we can't move in the other directions, unlike space? And you might be wondering, does time in the Transformers multiverse work the same way? Well, the Transformers multiverse has actually its own unique god of time in its lore. So today on Transformers Lore, ladies and gentlemen, we will be talking about the Chronarchitect. Now, the Chronarchitect is his name when he first appears. It's what we're going to be calling him throughout this video, but he also has a few other names, including the Time Walker, as well as the Ruler of Space and Time, although that title is kind of a title he gave himself to make himself sound more important than he is, because he isn't necessarily the ruler of space. And it's really unclear as to how much authority he has over time, right? Transformers lore takes this weird approach to its gods where it's like there is a realm and then there is this being strongly tied to that realm, but they technically operate independently of each other. Take, for example, the One, who is there at the Big Bang and is the core of all the multiverse, but he doesn't seem to be the guy who actually caused the Big Bang. It's like with Transformers lore, they want to include gods, but they don't want to get into like the fantasy, mythological aspects of that. They want to stay sci-fi. Even though so much in Transformers lore does not work unless we presume some sort of supernatural reality to the Transformers multiverse. And frankly, that's true of reality as well, and that's why secular attempts at making science fiction that has no supernatural element whatsoever is going to fail, but don't get me started on that. We're here to talk about the Chronarchitect. So the Chronarchitect originally showed up in the Omega Point storyline. That is from the 90s. It's a series of stories, comics, script readings, what have you, that is part of one story that's tied into the Beast Wars cartoon. And in the Omega Point storyline, the Chronarchitect shows up as a sort of god of time, but later on he gets more fleshed out. Independently, the Beast Wars Neo manga also included the character they called the Ruler of Space and Time. And the Ruler of Space and Time is kind of like a god capital G character, at least in his characterization in the Beast Wars Neo manga. Now, eventually it's going to be the Ask Vector Prime lore drops that are going to reveal that these two characters are one and the same. So who is the Chronarchitect? The Chronarchitect is said to be a god, the sort of same ilk as Primus and Unicron, which is to say a more astral being. And if we understand him to be related to Primus and Unicron, we can sort of fill in the gaps with what we know about Primus and Unicron. That means that the Chronarchitect was created by the One. Perhaps we could use his interesting domain over time we could speculate that perhaps Unicron, which the One created first to explore space and the multiverse, right? Perhaps Unicron was created to explore the space of this newly created reality that the One experienced, and the Chronarchitect might have been created to explore the temporal aspect, the time continuum of this new reality that the One found himself in. It is possible that the Chronarchitect might have been a light god, and I don't remember fully, but I think I might have called him a light god back in the very first few episodes of Transformers lore. If I said that, I rescind that. I don't necessarily think he's a light god. If anything, he seems too powerful, too otherworldly to be a light god when we compare him to light gods and light god descendants that we know, like God Messenger and God Master. I think it's more likely that the Chronarchitect might have been a creation of the One. When the Chronarchitect tries to manifest himself inside linear space and time, he often fails to do that because he's not usually in linear space-time. Very often you know that the Chronarchitect is there because you start to feel reality becoming more abstract around you and you get this strong sense of deja vu. That's how you know the Chronarchitect is calling out to you. And when he does sort of like force himself into a universe, the people witnessing him, often they don't even actually see him, they see visions of time, right? They see events in the future, events in the past. When he shows up, he's not really occupying one point in space and time. This is the main picture we have of him that I've probably used quite a few times already in this video, but notice how he's occupying two places at one time. He has made the claim that he is the creator of the universe. He made that claim in Primex 798.0 Gamma, which is the universe of the Beast Wars 2nd and Beast Wars Neo manga. There may be some truth to that. Primex 785.06 Alpha, that is the Japanese G1 cartoon universe, is an interesting universe because it did have its own sort of multiversal crisis. It had its own sort of like inverse of the Unicron singularity crisis. It had like a Primus singularity crisis, where Cybertron, the body of the universal singular Primus, was destroyed, was blown up. That, among some other problems that the universe experienced, things like the Beast Wars and the Time Storm with all that, that universe began to collapse in on itself. And that would have resulted in possibly the death of Primus. However, it seems other multiversal singular beings intervened to stop that universe from collapsing by taking bits and pieces of other destroyed universes and cramming it together, and that created the Japanese G1 cartoon universe. It seems that the Chronarchitect might have played a role in putting it back together. Primex 798.0 Gamma is sort of in the orbit of Primex 785.06 Alpha, so there might be some truth to him being the creator of that universe. He also might have had a hand in creating the Cloud World. Now, the Cloud World was a universe where there is no war, and it was destined to sort of guide the multiverse, to protect the multiverse, sort of like the Trans-Tech universe. But that universe was said to have been created by someone called the Creator, or the Creator of Life. And Ask Vector Prime is very vague on whether or not Chronarchitect had anything to do with the creation of the Cloud World, if he participated in the creation of the Cloud World, or if the Chronarchitect is himself the creator of life. That is a possibility that we cannot rule out. For the purpose of this video, we are going to be approaching the Chronarchitect as if he is not the creator, but it is possible that he is. In the Theomachy, in the war between Primus and Unicron, the Chronarchitect sides with Primus. He supports the Grand Plan, and he's very much against Unicron. He even works closely with Vector Prime of the 13, who perhaps they got involved with each other. They met when Vector Prime left the reality of time-space. You know, possibly that's when the two were able to become acquainted with each other. However, don't think of the Chronarchitect as a god that is interested in preserving life for the sake of life itself. He is willing to destroy entire universes to stop Unicron, no matter how many people die in the process. So he shows a sort of moral ambiguity, which is something we also see in Primus, especially in early fiction depicting Primus, like the Marvel comics, for example. Primus is a little bit more morally gray in that series. Let's get into some history, some actual stories we see the Chronarchitect pop up in. In Primex 984.17 Alpha, that is the US G1 cartoon universe, the Chronarchitect noticed when Unicron appeared and, ate the planet Lithone, prepared an attack on Cybertron, sent the Decepticons under Galvatron to destroy the Autobot Matrix, right? And the Chronarchitect, very panicked, very afraid Unicron was going to destroy Cybertron and the Matrix, contacted the Covenant. Now, the Covenant we've mentioned before in one of the very first Transformers lore episodes. They were creations of Primus before Primus created the Cybertronians. But the Chronarchitect went to the Covenant and told them we need to prepare for this Unicron thing. However, eventually, Rodimus Prime shows up, the Matrix falls to him, and Rodimus Prime is able to use the Matrix to stop Unicron in his attack on Cybertron, so the Covenant didn't need to get involved. However, if Rodimus had not appeared, then the Covenant would have gotten involved, perhaps even the Chronarchitect. There is a possibility, judging on his future actions, that the Chronarchitect might have been willing to destroy that universe to stop Unicron, which, good thing Rodimus Prime shows up. Later on in that same universe in the far future, the Chronarchitect is going to manifest himself to the Covenant again, this time to warn them about the coming Omega Point and the apocalypse that will come at the hands of Chakaract. And thanks to the Chronarchitect's warning, the Covenant are able to intervene in the Omega Point and stop Chakaract. that's a story for another episode. In Primex 798.0 Gamma, which is the Beast Wars 2nd Beast Wars Neo manga universe, Earth is seeded by Engelmaw energy. This is after events similar to Transformers the movie, where Unicron's energy seeds the planet Earth, it becomes the planet Gaia, you know the drill. And in order to make sure that the Engelmaw energy is not captured and used for reviving Unicron, the Chronarchitect sends in his herald, Heinrad, into the universe. And we talked about Heinrad a bit recently in our episode on the Unicronian minicons, but that's a Transtech Heinrad. We're talking about the Heinrad that works for the Chronarchitect. Heinrad is sent there to sort of make sure nobody uses the Engelmaw capsules to revive Unicron. Unfortunately, the Predacons do just that. Heinrad fails, and the Chronarchitect decides that he's going to destroy that universe. Heinrad says, no, give us a chance, right? He goes into the Chronarchitect's reality, right, to sort of hold back the Chronarchitect, you know, holding back God, as it were. And the Maximals are able to defeat Unicron with the sacrifice of Big Convoy. Another story we get about the Chronarchitect is when we have this villain called Mogon the Mass, which we really don't know much about, but Mogon the Mass is this big multiversal threat, more threatening than Unicron. The Chronarchitect creates this group of Cybertronians called the Time Warriors, which are led by Vector Prime of the 13, and the Chronarchitect sends the Time Warriors to stop Mogon the Mass, and eventually Vector Prime is able to kill Mogon the Mass. But those are our main stories, I think our only stories involving the Chronarchitect. We can presume that when the Shroud happens in Quad Wall Time 2015, that the Shroud sort of rips apart the Chronarchitect, because there's no more multiversal singularities after the Shroud. So the Chronarchitect is ripped apart into non-multiversal singular pieces that are scattered throughout the multiverse that are not in contact with each other, and in many universes we can presume the Chronarchitect doesn't even exist. This is why Transformers lore, our series, doesn't really talk about things after the Shroud, because there is no overarching story after the Shroud. But yeah, that's the end of the Chronarchitect, this god that transcends reality. He is ripped apart by the Shroud. I love Transformers lore. I love non-satisfying conclusions. It's also worth noting that the Chronarchitect shows up on the Cybertronian Zodiac. His constellation is in the shape of a tanuki, which is the alt mode of Heinrad, so there's that connection between him and Heinrad there. But it's associated with the concept of time, and he's associated with the orbital cycle, which is an equivalent concept to our month of Navitanion, which corresponds to roughly April 4th to May 9th in the Gregorian calendar. The Cybertronian Zodiac should be something we talk about in the future. It's actually a very interesting calendar. But there you have it, folks. That's the history of the Chronarchitect, the Transformers lore god of time. Did you learn something new? Did you learn about this, morally ambiguous god who is willing to destroy universes just to stop Unicron? What sort of cosmic horror story could you write about a god manifesting himself in the world by warping reality and one's own sense of time? Do you think the Chronarchitect has a relationship to the creator of the Cloud World? Is he the creator of the Cloud World? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But that's going to wrap up this video. Subscribe to this channel if you have not yet for more nerdy content. If you're into real life lore, real life history and mythology, consider subscribing to Radix the Lore Keeper, my channel where I talk about that. Follow me on social media, all the links are in the description, and have a great day, ladies and gentlemen.